In this video, we're going to explore the link between discipleship and character and virtue education. There's been an increased interest in discipleship, especially in evangelical circles, since about the 1940s, thanks to efforts probably like the Navigators and Campus Crusade for Christ. Some consider this discipleship phase as following an evangelistic emphasis that had put all of its energies in converting souls, but had done little to build the faith of the converted. The state of faith communities is also often linked to discipleship practices, and these are frequently offered as a remedy to lukewarm churches or as the key to church growth. We can find, in fact, many books on discipleship are presented on the back of patterns of churches that have grown numerically through discipleship. But the revival of the discipleship is not just opportunistic. It has come together with deeper readings, like, for example, of Matthew 28, talking about making disciples, with great books like Bonhoeffer's Discipleship or Thomas à Kempis's Imitation of Christ, and many scholarly publications. Generally speaking, we can see that there's been a theological transformation in the awareness of the Christian thing as a walk of sanctification and not just an experience of salvation or supernatural or some sacramental participation. Discipleship paradigms are different. What exactly is happening in discipleship today? Now, there can be a love-hate relationship with the term discipleship because it says so much and so little at the same time. Sometimes it's just used to cover up some thin practices and some poor thinking. So, for example, a church may widely advertise a world-changing discipleship program, but really it's no more than a slightly enhanced Sunday school program. Others have used the term with great gravity, but then if you dig deeper to try to find out what it really means, you find out that it means that people should give more, sing louder, and show up at the events. So, where engagement with discipleship is more serious, it seems to me, however, there are different paradigms operating within a large umbrella, each sprouting up from some particular historical, cultural, or theological root, and each defining a main aim of discipleship. This makes it extremely difficult to know exactly what is being said when one says discipleship. An overview of some of the key concepts that emerge from the indexes of recent books on discipleship tells a story of great variety. So we see, for example, that discipleship has to do with replication, orientation to others, consecration, submission, being more than just a believer, counting the cost, being crucified with Christ, service, ministry, prayer, purity, leadership training, mentoring, Bible study. But in all of this, we can see some overarching paradigms, and these will help us as we try to think where we stand with character and virtue education. So, for example, we have a service and performance discipleship paradigm, where the objective of discipleship is active service of some sort, which can be evangelism, more disciple making, church planting, or social, cultural, and political involvement. Then there's also a teaching paradigm in discipleship, where the main aim of discipleship is to enhance knowledge and understanding of theology and the Bible, with the hope that this will lead to personal transformation and enhance the ability to teach the Bible to others and so make more disciples. Then we see membership paradigms, where discipleship entails enculturation to a particular denomination or faith community. There are also mystical, devotional paradigms where discipleship has to do with encountering God and experiencing His presence and supernatural intervention. Or we have consecration paradigms. Here, discipleship is defined as those who are completely devoted to God, which usually means that they prioritize faith-related activities over secular work and are involved in missions. Then we can find enchantment paradigms that aim at producing disciples that walk in the world with a sense of mystery and in search of wisdom. We also find therapeutic paradigms that define a disciple as one who has found inner healing and health. Or we can find leadership paradigms, where to be a disciple means acquiring all of the characteristics and abilities of a leader. Or relational paradigms, again, where our different vision of disciple as success is defined in terms of healthy interpersonal relationships, usually in small group contexts. Now, sometimes one or more of these paradigms prevail, but very often they're blended into integrated approaches. Each one of them normally points to Jesus as the prime example of discipleship, depicting him alternatively either as the master servant, the great teacher, the spiritual man, the great healer, the leader of all leaders. And each of these paradigms also has a different idea of what maturity is, ranging from being active to having critical knowledge and understanding, or to knowing how to be effective. And finally, each one of these paradigms usually also contemplates some form of replication, where those who are discipled reach out to disciple others. So, where do character and virtue find their place in this broad landscape of discipleship? Surely it is an important place, and we can see it at least from three different angles. The first is the implicit value that is given to character and virtue in all of the paradigms. Although none of the paradigms listed so far normally make character and virtue explicit, there are implicit virtues that uphold the paradigms themselves. So, for example, the service paradigm operates through the virtues of compassion and love. The teaching paradigm requires the intellectual virtues. The devotional paradigm will operate best with those that are humble and temperate. The enchantment paradigm presupposes that virtue and wisdom is deployed, and the leadership paradigm calls on the virtues of courage, magnanimity, and temperance at the very least. There are also underlying virtues, such as constance, that are assumed and operate in the background of all of the discipleship paradigms, and without which no discipleship program would get very far. Perhaps thinking of discipleship in terms of the virtues might provide a unifying theme and structure to these different paradigms. A second benefit and angle of an emphasis on character and virtue is the corrective function that it can exercise within each of these paradigms. So, for example, the therapeutic paradigm can fall into the danger of removing responsibility from individuals. This pitfall can occur as those that are being discipled in this way may learn that their current character, whether good or bad, is linked to their past experiences and relationships, usually parental. And this can produce unhealthy passivity and a victim attitude. So here, focusing on character and virtue contributes to shifting the focus back to the individual as a responsible agent. This benefit might also be illustrated in the leadership paradigm that can be kept away from becoming sets of manipulatory strategies by adding an emphasis on who the leader is, rather than just on techniques and strategies of what he or she knows and what she can do and deploy. A final angle, however, that shows us the importance of character and virtue in understanding discipleship is more explicit and introduces a further discipleship paradigm that I have not yet mentioned, which is a moral paradigm. In this paradigm, the main aim of discipleship is to correct the moral life of the believer and to cultivate holiness. This paradigm can go badly. It can become a simple list of legalistic prescriptions, but in its best shape is probably closest to character and virtue education. It can be recognized when discipleship texts speak, for example, about being salt and earth, about the deeds that accompany faith, about the fruit of the Spirit, about transformation or the affections, or about holiness. There is a strong affinity between character and virtue education and these conceptions of discipleship, and specific virtues are often explicitly mentioned. The most frequent of these are love, temperance, humility, and faith. There is a danger, however, in these moral paradigms that they remain prescriptive and simply try to inculcate goodness as if it were a matter of technique and continual bending of the will in every specific action to obey given rules. These paradigms have much to learn from virtue ethics that focus on becoming a good person rather than continually choosing to do good things. When we are good people, then we will naturally do what is good without having to make constantly conscious choices. Becoming a disciple in this sense is not like learning to bake a cake that merely requires scrupulous obedience to the guidelines in the recipe book. It is rather like writing a book, where no amount of technique or instructions will provide a sufficient formula. The writing of the book is the expression of who the author and what the book is, and of what she knows, and what of experiences she has had. So it is with this kind of discipleship. As Aquinas has reminded us, it is possible to make a journey without thinking of one's destination at every step. The focus here is to nourish the human agent so that good actions are performed spontaneously as an expression of consolidated character. I have found a few successful discipleship programs that actually make specific reference to virtue and morals in their foci, and some authors who deal explicitly with virtue. Dallas Willard, for example, writes about spiritual formation and the development of character, declaring that, I quote, "Discipleship is the relationship I stand into Jesus Christ in order that I might take on his character. As his disciple, I am learning from him how to live my life in the kingdom as he would that I were. The natural outcome is that my behavior is transformed." The language of spiritual formation is actually used quite often to reflect moral change. One of the most popular discipleship books remains Bonhoeffer's Discipleship, which he wrote against the background of Nazi Germany. In his time, Christians had been lulled into slumber by the doctrine of justification, had become accustomed to vice and immune to the appeal of virtue. Bonhoeffer exegetes the Sermon on the Mount, and he speaks about becoming like Jesus in no uncertain terms, presenting a vision of formation that shapes disciples into the likeness of Jesus through conformity to his ethical patterns of life. There's no room for spiritualizing in Bonhoeffer's language, and although he does not specifically refer to the category of the virtues as such, he writes forcefully about truthfulness, about love, about loving our enemies, about the humility that accompanies hidden righteousness, and about vices such as wrath, pride, and avarice. Of all the discipleship paradigms, I fear that the moral one is the least popular. So that is an overview of some of the discipleship paradigms and how they can relate to character and virtue.